We're back with more of our Battleground Tracker poll and CBS News Elections Director, Anthony Salvanto. Anthony, tell me, we'll start with the Republicans. We've got Iowa and New Hampshire in the books heading into South Carolina. What does it look like, the field?
Donald Trump is up here. He is up big. Now, his lead is about the same as it's been, but underneath that lead, the strength of his support has grown. So among his supporters, the ones who say they are now firmly committed to him, is up from last month. And to me, John, this looks like the anatomy of a bump. This is what momentum looks like. You talked to these folks last month, and they said, in order for us to be more firmly with Donald Trump, he has to convince me that he can win. Well, what happened? He won. He won in New Hampshire. He won big. So you see that movement, and I think it explains a lot of it. Then you also see that he is up here with a couple of key groups, namely conservatives and evangelicals. In fact, his lead with evangelicals has grown over the last month. Now, they're not quite the same group here that they are in Iowa. They are a little more concerned about terrorism and the economy than faith and religion, as we learned in Iowa. But that said, those are two key groups. Evangelicals make up a majority of the electorate here, so that underpins his support.
We've been, you and I, talking about for months the durability of Donald Trump's support. It's what allows him to survive every time something happens and people think, well, this will now hurt him. So it sounds like that's only getting more durable. Ted Cruz, let's talk about him for a moment. He's the one trying to make inroads into those groups, evangelicals, conservatives, very conservatives. How's he doing after his showing in Iowa?
Well, he's got the very conservative here. That is the one subset of conservatives with which he is up. And that follows the pattern out of Iowa and even to some degree out of New Hampshire. So also, you saw, even in his closing statement with you last night, where he tried to reinforce that if you want the real conservative, if you want these and, check the boxes on what conservatives are looking for. But Donald Trump isn't really competing in that same space. So Donald Trump is competing more as the person who can fix things. So where he's attacking Donald Trump against not having the conservative bona fides, that hasn't quite taken hold yet here.
What about the non-Donald Trump, non-Ted Cruz lane, what some people call the establishment lane, the mainstream candidates? How do they sort out?
Well, first of all, we saw a bump for John Kasich. He went from 2% up to 9% here. He actually does particularly well among non-evangelicals and specifically among the folks who say they would like the next Republican nominee to compromise and negotiate more with Democrats to get things done. Now, of course, the trouble for him is that's a minority here. That's two-thirds say they want somebody to stand up more for Democrats. So he may be limited.
So if there's a limited group out there for Kasich in South Carolina, that's important because he needs to do well in South Carolina to get a little momentum. What about Rubio? Where do things stand for him?
Rubio is in third here at 15%. One of the challenges for him coming out of the last debate before last night, and even you saw in our instant poll, is his metric on being prepared for the presidency. So he's about middle of the pack on that. He's a little lower, even lower than Jeb Bush in that regard. So that's his challenge going forward. If he can build that up, he can probably build some momentum.
Switch to the Democrats. Clinton and Sanders, what's it look like?
It's still big for Hillary Clinton, as you mentioned in your interview with Bernie Sanders. Very clearly, the African-American vote here is what is underpinning her lead. Now, we've got a different electorate here, and the African-American vote will make up a majority of that Democratic vote coming up in 2 weeks. So she's up big with them. Bernie Sanders up with white voters. And with that vote, you see most African-Americans say that they feel like they know Hillary Clinton very well. But by comparison, very few say that they know Bernie Sanders very well. So you might see that as a challenge for him because he's got to introduce himself. But you also might see that as an opportunity, as he mentioned in his interview, if he can introduce himself and find some favor.
So are you suggesting her support isn't super durable? He could go in and grab some of it if they just knew him better?
I think that's the challenge for him. His support is based in some of the same things we saw in New Hampshire and in Iowa. He beats Hillary Clinton on the honest and trustworthy question, although here both candidates are seen as honest and trustworthy. And, he still wins among young voters and he wins among white voters. It's really a question of what the shape of the electorate is here. And as you mentioned in his interview, as we head south in this race, there just aren't that many states that are friendly to him if he keeps the same coalition that he had up in New Hampshire.
All right, Anthony Salvanto, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for being with us.